what I broadly understood was that most all of you are, there was one occupational therapy that was supposed to be there. Okay, you are an occupational therapist. Okay. So broadly speaking, we all are in the rehab field. Now, when you look at rehab from your perspective also, I got to know that we are talking about two kind of things. One is a diagnosed sleep problem. So where you're talking about insomnia, you're talking about OSA, you're talking about restless leg syndrome and all that. Those are diagnosed problems of the origin of sleep. So they are known as sleep disorders. Second set of problem, as these people, gentlemen rightly said, is about the patients who are having pain and are complaining of sleep disorders along with that. So that would be more of a dysfunction where we're trying to find out a correlation in between the sleep as well as the issues like pain. And someone was talking about a sports person there. How does that go correlate directly? So during the workshop, we have divided into two parts. Dr. Christina Franz would be dealing more with the sleep disorders per se, and we will be trying to find out the management for sleep disorders. For example, OSA, bruxism, RLS, whatever we're talking about, she'll be talking about that more. And I am going to be focusing on more as physiotherapist. What are the other things we can do along with the intervention that we are giving for our patients, usually of chronic pain, RA, OA, where you're looking at increased inflammation, where you are looking at central sensitization, where you're looking at patients with chronic pains. So taking it further, when you look at this image, what comes to your mind? The first image that you look at. What comes to your mind when you look at this image? Sound sleep. Along with that, if you look at it carefully, there's a slight smile on the face also. That is also which is remarkable, because that is what is happening to the human body. It is actually smiling when you are sleeping. Why is that the case? That is the case because that is the time, as Dr. Malik has very rightly pointed out, about all the physiological mechanisms by virtue of which we are able to replenish, rejuvenate, and a lot of healing which takes place during the sleep. Whereas if you look at the second image here, what comes to your mind over here? Discomfort and pain. Why did you think it was associated with pain, and why not something else? The facial expression, the patient is holding the neck, right? So because the patient is holding the neck, you are able to assume that the patient is having a neck pain, because of which most probably the patient is not able to sleep. So this is the part that I'm going to focus on more in my lecture, instead of the management of sleep disorders which Dr. Franz is going to take care of. What is important these days is it has become a smart thing to say that I study in the night and I sleep during the day. It is a smart thing to do. It is a fashionable thing to do also. And someone was asking the question earlier that is it normal? I would say, I would beg to differ from sir. It is not normal. Why? And I have a reason behind that, because most of it is acquired. It is not a genetic thing, what you are facing right now. Yes, some of you would have been naturally born, as sir rightly said, would be larks or owls, who have a natural tendency to go towards them, but most of you have acquired it by a behavioral change. Similarly, arcs and owls can also be undergoing a rehabilitative therapy, not only a rehabilitative therapy, rather a behavioral change, so that they can change their time. In today's time, when you're talking about circadian rhythms, where you're talking about night workers, when we're talking about jet lag and all that, over there, this behavioral modifications play a very important role. It's basically about what you are telling yourself is normal for you. Okay. So along with that, if you look at it carefully, we are talking about almost 8 hours of normal sleep, which is almost 1/3 of the entire time that you have. But if you look at your own curriculums about your own lifestyles, how much of it are you putting up there? So only the 2/3 of the part of the human life cycle was supposed to be activity based, and 1/3 was given to us by the physiology itself to take care of the body during that particular time. And we are surviving on much, much lesser sleep, and it is decreasing over the time period. It is not something new. It is not that it has happened all of a sudden. There's a boom of people who don't want to sleep anymore. So this is about the slow change which happened from 16th to 17th century to the 20th century. If you look at the quotes which are given on the right side of the screen, you will see these are the quotes coming from 16th to 17th century, where they're talking about the positive aspects of sleep. So you look at Shakespeare, who says, enjoy the honey-dewy labor of love. What does it mean? It basically means it is after a hard day's work, you are able to enjoy yourself, and that is what sleep is supposed to be. The second sleep, we talk about, oh sleep, oh gentle sleep, nature's soft nurse, how have I frightened thee? Which is going to point out again towards what have I done because of which I'm not able to sleep very well, right? And then you have sleep is the golden chain that ties the health and our bodies together. Whereas if you shift to the opposite side of it, this you can actually, if I am a person who would want to talk about sociology and psychology along with my lectures, I think I'm going to shift a bit to that side also. This is the time when the Industrial Revolution was taking place. So there was a lot of emphasis on performance, on activity, on what new things we can do. We are better workers. So we were trying to produce better workers. A better worker basically means who works for longer duration of time. So that is why Levi's was invented and a jeans and a denim was invented, because it is supposed to be used by workers more, because it is not going to get torn easily. It is wrinkle free. You don't have to iron it. You don't have to wash it regularly. So that is a time when this was happening. So if you look at the first one, where you talk about Thomas Edison, the reason, one of the primary reasons which he said he invented electricity was because he did not want the surroundings to go into darkness, because that is associated with sleep. So he said sleep is a criminal waste of time and a heritage from our cave days. The second one that you see here was from Margaret Thatcher, very, very commonly seen. She used to quote it very frequently in her speeches, that sleep is for the wimps. Similarly, if you look at the Gordon Gekko, he said money never sleeps, which is very famously said in the, he works for the Wall Street, and he talks about it in those times. Now, during this shift which was happening in the 19th and 20th century, there was a time when it was supposed to be a time where you work more. So you must have been familiar with the term investment bankers which came in. The Wall Street never sleeps is a very commonly used quote around. So that was supposed to be something to be feel proud of, that I sleep lesser and I'm very proud of that fact. That was the time when sleeplessness increases, and what we are looking today is a fruit of those times. That is why the incidence is increasing. It is not that all of a sudden one day as a generation we decided not to sleep. It basically happened as a change in the paradigm by the virtue of understanding the work culture only. Then leisure time was expendable and sleep was equivalent to that. So the people became more lethargic. We were not ready to play. We were not ready to go and do our activities. It was replaced more by sitting. So we became more and more sedentary. So when we became more sedentary, automatically there was a shift which took place. And this was a time which was expendable. So for doing a physical activity, you need to get up from the chair and go out for a certain time. Whereas if you want to play on a mobile game, you can do that within 5 minutes. So you want a break of 5 minutes, take out your phone, play a game, and it is done within 5 to 7 minutes, and you're back to studying again. So you got your brief set of leisure also, and you are able to study again. So you actually did not waste time. In their language, you did not waste time getting up and going and playing a sport there. But there were also, as I said, broad societal changes which happened. And a very common saying which was, if you snooze, you lose. A lot of times you would have heard that when you are putting the alarm clock forward, you are actually losing on your time. Okay, I would say that yes, that is true. You are losing on your time, but it depends upon what time do you actually want to get up. Is it actually early in the morning which you are trying to correct your behavior and you went to sleep at the right time in the night before, then definitely don't snooze it. But if it was only because you slept very late in the night and you want to get up in the morning again, then you have all the rights. Your body wants you to snooze it. Then physiotherapists and sleep. Now you might assume that, as I saw, there are a few research scholars from our center. Of course, we are working on sleep in the past almost 15 years, I would say. But I see Dipsaru also, you guys have started working, and so am I seeing in around Manav Rashna, there are a few students who are also working on sleep now, and I would say that a few students in Amity University are also working on sleep. So as physiotherapists, what roles do we play here? There are two good articles which are there, which I would suggest that all of you read, and they are not new articles, by the way. They're not new articles. So that means there are people who are working on sleep, but yes, in India, we are in a neonatal stages, as I said. So sleep health and its assessment and management in physical therapy practice. This was published way back in 2009. And the second article that I've put here is the consideration of sleep dysfunction and rehabilitation. These articles, I think, are there in your handbook also. I would also suggest that you go through the handbook, because we have tried to place a few articles which would be relevant to you in the handbook. But over the course of 5 years of the 5 days program that we are having here, we would also put in some new papers for you to read every day. And I expect you to read every day when you come, so that we can have a better interaction amongst each other, and we will be able to clear more queries that you have. And as you I think all of you are at least masters or pursuing masters, we expect a good amount of interaction to happen with you, so that you can clarify your doubts more. It is not about a theoretical teaching more, which is going to make it a better learning experience for you. It is about how much you interact with the faculty here, so that you are able to get things better. Now, there are 2-3 terms which are very commonly used in the literature. One term is what is called a sleep deficiency. So sleep deficiency, again, there are 2 terms which are again used very commonly. One is quality and one is quantity when you talk about sleep. So quality can further be classified in multiple methods, and the quantity would basically be quantified as the time duration. Quantity, we normally say between 8 hours you should be sleeping, some say between 6 to 8 hours. But after doing my research over the years and reading the literature, I would say that it is individualistic also. I would not by rule tell my patient to sleep for 8 hours definitely. In the next day morning when you get up, if you are happy and you are restored, I think it is fair enough. But of course, if you are taking for your restoration, you are taking 10 to 12 hours of sleep, then it is a problem, which usually happens, which is related to sleep debt, which is very commonly seen in young adults more commonly, because they are not able to function during the 5 days. They are running on very, very less amount of sleep during the working days, or rather the days in which they were supposed to do their activities, busy finishing assignments or busy watching Netflix or whatever you were doing in the night. So the third day, that is the Saturday which comes in the morning, you tend to sleep till very late. So that is your body trying to cover up the sleep debt which was there in the days prior, in the week prior that you had. That is something which, according physiologically, if it is done once or twice, it is acceptable. But if it goes beyond that, then it becomes a behavioral pattern. That is where it becomes a matter of concern. And the third term which we see here is sleep dysfunction. So sleep dysfunction would be anything by which there is a pathological modification in architecture. What is architecture? Architecture, I think Dr. Franz would be talking about it in detail, where we're talking about total sleep time, sleep latency. There are various terms which are used to define the sleep in totality in one particular night. Okay? It is not REM and non-REM. That is not architecture. That is the stages of sleep. So when we talk about architecture, we talk about various parameters. How do you define it? So we will be dealing about that in detail later on. So, and the quality as well as the quantity of sleep would be known as dysfunctions. Any questions till now? I would love to take questions here if you have any regarding the three terms: sleep debt, deficiency, and dysfunctions. Am I okay? And I sleep very fast. I speak very fast, so you can tell me to slow down. My students are familiar with me, so they know I speak very fast. The others, you can tell me to slow down and slow down in the middle. Okay? Yes, slow down. Yes. Christina, most of the time when I'm talking to her, she tells me to slow down. Please repeat. She did not understand what I said. Okay, now this is just a repetition of what Dr. Malik has done prior. So I'm not going to spend more time in it. It is just about effects of sleep deprivation. So what is remarkable here is that top to bottom, all the systems are affected. That is what I would want to tell you here. There is an article regarding sleep deprivation in your handbook also. You can have a look there. Now coming to sleep and physiotherapists, how are we related? Okay. Before we go to this, I would also like to tell you that most of the studies or the research that we have is conducted on basically, I would say, 3 ways. One would be on normals, one would be on patients. These patients can either be sleep problem patients, that is diagnosed with sleep condition or a sleep disorder, or would be another set of patients who are having sleep as as a comorbidity, I should say. Okay. Then most of the studies which are there in sleep deprivation studies are done on normals. And a lot of animal studies have been done. People like Dr. Malik, they work extensively on animals also. The physiologists, most of them are preferring. In fact, the literature that we have now is coming from the animal studies more. Because it was not humanly possible or rather ethically correct to create a deprivation study for human beings beyond a certain time frame. There have been studies, I think maximum what I've studied is 36 hours of sleep deprivation which they have done. More than that, it becomes difficult to do it on human beings. So that is why a lot of research, especially the exercise literature, if you read, it would be difficult to correlate it directly because that is most of it is done on normals. And the deprivation studies done on those individuals is on normals, as a result of which what you study more would be on deprivation studies rather than a study where it is clinically more relevant or clinically more seen. Okay? So these are the aspects on which the physiotherapist is going to play a role other than the sleep disorder. Okay? So we are working on pain, we are working on muscle recovery and tissue healing, which becomes an integral part of healing. Then the incidence of musculoskeletal disorders increases in poor sleep. Motor learning and rehabilitation understanding decreases if the patient has not slept very well. There is an increased risk of balance and injury in elderly especially. Inflammation increases if the sleep is not proper. And adherence to the physiotherapy also decreases if the patient has improper sleep. Okay? Any problems here? We're going to talk about each one of them in detail eventually. Okay? So first, why is it important? So as movement therapist, as function therapist, as you saw, whatever points we talked about just now are ones which are absolutely related to physiotherapist. There is no doubt in my mind at all that we need to know this, because without this, if there is, my patient is talking about a disturbance in mobility as a result of pain or motor integration or regeneration or inflammation, it is my concern immediately. So pain and sleep, first of all, when we talk about what is pain, pain is basically as described by the International Society of Pain. It is a physiological and emotional reaction to a stimuli. The stimuli is again a term which I personally would like to say that may not be fixed, because that is what sensitization is all about. You're talking about a phenomena, you're talking about a stimuli which maybe is non-existent, or the patient's reactions are not proportional to the amount of stimuli. That is what pain is all about. Whereas if we talk about sleep, for physiotherapy especially, it is an enigma. And as a lot of you already said that you've not studied in your undergrad. So what we study about sleep in our undergrad is only a small chapter maybe in physiology. After that, no one talks about it at all across the country. I'm not talking about my university alone. We are equal culprits here also. But other than that, other countries, other places also, we're not talking about sleep again, other than the one chapter or maybe half an hour that was spent in teaching you sleep when you were doing your undergrad studies. So as a result of it, sleep is something which we are not confident about. So when we are not confident about a thing, we don't want to ask the patient about it, because the moment the patient will ask you something, you will not be confident in answering to that patient. That is why you don't want to touch on assessments of these aspects at all. So there's a complex association in between pain and sleep, with each one having a significant impact. The important term that I'm talking about here is significant impact. I am not talking about directionality right now. Eventually I'm going to speak about the directionality, but right now there is a significant impact of them on each other. So we are accepting the fact that there is a relation in between each other. And how did we come to this conclusion? By the multiple studies that were done across the last, I would say, 30 to 40 years, where a lot of studies were conducted on patients with pain. Animal studies were conducted where pain was induced and sleep was assessed in mice most commonly. And or there was a patient was deprived of sleep and the pain assessment was done pre and post that. These are the two very commonly seen terms. If you look at this here, you will see that there are two things which are being used here. One is chronic pain, and one is even a term which has been coined as painsomnia, which is also being coined as painsomnia. So painsomnia basically means unable to sleep because of pain. A very good study was conducted way back in 2015, where the entire US was covered by the virtue of a questionnaire, and they tried to study about the sleep of the US. They came up with some very important correlations in between sleep and pain. First is that 57% of the patients had lack of sleep, which led to interference with the pain. So which is almost more than 50% of the patients. At the same time, if you look at the other side of the slide here, a 36-minute more sleeping time led to a decrease in the pain. So might seem a half an hour, might seem a very, very small time, but at the same time, if you look at it carefully, there is a lot of effect of this, even this half an hour has had on the patient's pain perception. So consequences of chronic sleep disorders, it is affecting multiple areas. We are looking at comorbidities, we are looking at the social changes, we are looking at the change in the quality of life, and ultimately this is going to lead to a change in the socioeconomic condition of the patient. So one thing that we talked about was the mental health. So in depression and anxiety, if you have ever seen a psychiatric patient around you or in a hospital, you would know that patients with anxiety find it very difficult to sleep. Very, very difficult to sleep. In fact, they are given medication so that they are able to sleep. And they would go 2 days, 3 days without sleep at times, which increases their reaction times. Similarly, there is a negative impact whenever the night you did not sleep very well, according to your standards. I'm not talking about your routine, but according to your standards, if you have not slept very well, the next day you are irritable. It will be difficult to drive. In fact, for me, if I have not slept very well, it is very difficult for me to drive the next day. I would tend to fall asleep on every red light which comes. So there would be a cognitive impairment also. Along with that, there is a decrease in the immunity system. This is very clearly seen in whenever you have flu, for example, you want to sleep. So your body is actually restoring from that inflammation or from that infection which was there by virtue of getting into sleep. And similarly, as a result of all this, the social relationships are affected, which would ultimately lead to a poorer quality of life, and ultimately the socioeconomic strata is going to be affected. This article again is there in your handbook. You can have a look there. You can read in detail from where I picked it up. Now, there are at least, if you look at the healthcare system, there are almost 90% of the patients who are attending to pain clinic are reporting of at least one sleep problem. That makes almost everyone, that means that you only need to ask the question. The whole point here is just asking the patient one question: did you sleep well yesterday? A. B. Do you usually sleep well? Because there is always a recall period that you're talking about. That how long back do you think? For example, if it is exam time right now, I understand the sleep is going to be disturbed. If there was a death in the family, as Sir talked about, that whenever there's an increased emotional reactions, then the sleep is also bound to get affected. So if there was no other such thing, but still the sleep is affected, then that needs to be documented down. And 65% of these patients would identify themselves as poor sleepers. When we say poor sleeper, it basically means someone who did not sleep well. Again, I'm not talking about quality or quantity. It can be either, it can be both. We can be touching on both of them. Sleep complaints are present in almost 67 to 88% of the patients with chronic sleep disorders, with at least 50% of them being diagnosed as clinical insomnia. Okay? And it is also commonly seen that the patients who are having insomnia or other sleep impairments are also having more pain. So that means there is a relationship, as I said earlier. It seems to be pointing out towards a bidirectional relationship more than a unidirectional relationship because of the study that I've quoted here. So there is another article here which is talking about sleep deprivation and pain perception. This article I think is there in your handbooks also. If not, I will share it with you. So this article basically talks about that how would sleep deprivation lead to an alteration in the sleep perception of the patient. So one of the initial studies which were done by Copperman in the way back in 1934. That was the first time when it was demonstrated that sleep dysfunction can affect the nociceptive process. As physiotherapists, we understand nociception extremely well. I think we are one professionals who know it is on our tips that pain management, nociception, and the opioid function and all that. This is how the tense works. Just remember your tense, and this is what is happening here. So in the background of this, what we can say is that there's an association, yes. Then the two questions which will be coming to our mind are pain and sleep reciprocally arranged with each other, or there's a unidirectionality. And what mechanisms are associated with this particular function that we talk about. So again, there's an article here, how do sleep disturbance and chronic pain interrelate? Insights from a longitudinal and cognitive behavioral clinical trial research. Here, what I've highlighted here for you is the early work which was done by Moltefsky was one of the initial people who work on between the directionality of pain and sleep and relation in between them. He said that between sleep disturbance and chronic pain is likely to best be characterized as a reciprocal vicious cycle. As again, as physios, we are very familiar with the word vicious cycle. We talk about pain and spasm vicious cycle continuously whenever we are right from our second year onwards. So similarly, according to him, it's a vicious cycle which talks about pain leads to lesser sleep leads to pain. Remember this because this is cyclical in nature. This would be a cyclical thing in nature. Now, there were two good studies again which were conducted. Which one was done in a British sample where there was a group of individuals were taken who were not having a headache. Assessments were done, sleep assessments were done. And at a 1 year follow-up, it was found that the patients who did not have a headache but had insomnia, it was found to be correlated. So 1 year insomnia symptoms were present at the baseline in the patient who did not have a headache. Whereas the second study, if you look at it, this was conducted in Norway. Here, it was found that endorsement of sleep problems defined as frequently falling asleep or having a sleep disorder was significantly more likely to develop fibromyalgia later on. Okay, again. I'm talking about both the things here. We're talking about somewhere where the sleep disorder came first and the pain disorder came later. And in the first one, we talked about sleep disorder first, the pain disorder first and the sleep disorder after that. Thus, we can say that there is definitely a reciprocal relationship in between the two. Whereas, finally, when you read it, now, if you read the research which was conducted around 2007 to, I think, 15, 16, 17, you would very specifically, we will be talking about bidirectionality. But now when you read it, you would find there is slightly more exertion on the fact that poor sleep may exert a stronger correlation as compared to pain on sleep. Okay? That is a very important clinical marker for physiotherapists because that also means that it is not that the patient had reduced sleep capsulitis because of which he could not sleep. It is very much probable that the sleep was because the patient did not sleep very well, the pain the next day because of adhesive capsulitis was much more. So that directionality is slightly more biased towards sleep than being biased towards pain, but there is bidirectionality. Okay. Further, there are several large prospective studies which suggest that brain problems increase with the risk of developing future chronic pain, and good sleep increases the chances that chronic pain will remit over time. Okay. Now, mechanisms which are there. Mechanism, first thing that we talk about, pain sensitivity increases. So what do you mean by pain sensitivity? Dr. Mallika has told you very well that there is a system which is working. I don't want to go into the details of those. So basically the brain modulation system which is there, that is the pain perception basically increases. Another important thing is also here is that there is a difference between the male and the female understandings. The females have more chances of the pain perception getting affected. That is one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why fibromyalgia is more commonly seen in women as compared to men. Second is increased inflammation due to sleep loss. This is again correlated by the biomarkers like IL-6 and TNF-alpha, which is found more in patients who have had chronic sleep problems. But as someone has asked earlier that which is the best marker for identifying sleep problems, it is difficult to conclude that because each of the markers, there is no marker which is exclusively for sleep. They all are doing multiple jobs. So yes, you can correlate it, but you cannot be definitive that, okay, this is more, that is why this is going to happen there. Third is dysregulation of the endogenous opioid system. Then we have disrupted dopamine and serotonin signaling, which is there, autonomic nervous system dysfunctions, hormonal imbalances which are affecting pain perception, and sleep fragmentation and central sensitization. I'm going to talk briefly about each one of them. So first thing directly affects pain perception. There is a disruptive function in between the prefrontal cortex function, as well as there is an overactivation of the pain pathways. As a result of it, the patient is more sensitive to the same pain. And how was the study done? A group of individuals were sleep deprived, and before that a pinprick was taken, and with that pinprick the VAS was taken. After the sleep deprivation, the next day they were told to respond to that pinprick again, and the pain perception came to be higher. That is one of the studies which was conducted way back earlier, where the pain perception was supposed to be correlated with poor sleep. Then endogenous pain modulation. There are two kinds of modulation which take place. One is pain inhibition, other is pain facilitation. Okay, so when we talk about pain inhibition, you're talking about the decrease in the pain overall, and pain facilitation would be increasing on the nociception mechanism more. Although pain facilitation and pain inhibition mechanisms have been found to be altered in insomnia population when compared to control, but it has also been suggested that pain inhibition is more effective as compared to your pain facilitation. Any doubts till now? Am I going too fast? Gurfan is smiling. Why are you smiling? Why are you smiling? I'm not going fast, and you used to me speaking. Yes, please. Sorry? It's getting too fast. Okay, I'll slow down. Okay. So now yes. Okay. Now when you talk about the dopamine and serotonin signaling, here what is important is that you are familiar with dopamine as serotonin. They are not primarily sleep markers. Again, I would say the same thing. But they are playing a role as far as sleep is concerned. Okay? So dopamine, again, why are they playing a role is because of the pathways that are there. They are having a common pathway as sleep. I think Dr. Malik has spoken about these pathways when he spoke about in his lecture. So decreased dopamine availability because the receptors for dopamine are busy somewhere else. So as a result of it, the dopamine absorption is not taking place appropriately. Both sleep disturbance and dysfunctional endogenous analgesia would be seen in patients with chronic pain. That is one of the reasons which why the patients with Parkinson's are also complaining of pains, which is unexplained at times. That is one of the reasons, because then you are looking at dopamine correlation there in Parkinson's patients also. Then second pathway becomes your serotonin. Again, physiotherapists talk very commonly about serotonin because we are familiar with one of the pain markers it is there. But serotonin also plays a role in talking about the sleep pathways. So altered patterns in circadian behavior or even contribute to a disruption of sleep-wake homeostasis along with the dysfunctional endogenous analgesia. So we are talking about here that serotonin is one of the important markers which is talking about homeostasis in the human body. Because the homeostasis is not maintained very well in the absence of serotonin, the pain perception is going to be higher. So opioidic signaling is also implicated in the shared modulatory mechanisms of pain and sleep regulations. So autonomic nervous system, it affects both sympathetic as well as parasympathetic system. it basically leads to an increase in the sympathetic activity, because of which you are looking at an elevated heart rate. As a result of this, you are looking at changes in the HRV. So a number of my students here who are working on autonomic nervous system are trying to find out a correlation between various patients and their HRV as well as normals. I think we've already published one article on how is the HRV getting altered in normals also. And when you're talking about a normal individual, if you do not sleep very well, then you are looking at changes in the heart rate variability. There would be a higher blood pressure. There would be increased cortisol. Okay, cortisol is another important biomarker which is there. And why is cortisol an important marker? Is because cortisol is also related to increased stress levels. So whenever the stress levels are higher, the cortisol is going to be higher. Hence, a lot of times in the patient with poor sleep, cortisol is found to be higher. I think Iram is not here. Dr. Iram is a PhD scholar with me. She is also working on sleep. Karushi also worked on on cortisol. So they found that the cortisol was higher in patients who had poorer sleep, and after intervention, we were able to lower down these cortisol levels also. And heightened inflammation is also seen. Again, if you look at this side, you would also see that most of these conditions are already seen in cardiac patients. In patients who are having cardiopulmonary involvement, for example, high blood pressure and all that, in them, that is one of the reasons why the sleep is also going to be affected. Now, parasympathetic activity is decreased. So that is why you're looking at a lower vagal tone, you are looking at a decreased heart rate variability, and an impaired cardiovascular regulation, which is going to be there. Then comes hormonal imbalances. There are basically two things if we want to talk about. Melatonin, the talk of the town, everybody over the countertop, whether you go to Starbucks or wherever you go, even Amazon, if you put your sleep thing, the moment you put sleep, you will get a melatonin gummy available, which you can eat to improve your sleep. But sorry to say, as sir had already pointed out, this is not an important marker. It is important, yes, because it is related to circadian rhythm. Yes, it is supposed to be secreted at a particular point of time, and this is going to lead to promotion of sleep, but it is not the sole marker. Nor would an oral ingestion of melatonin would directly correlate with an improvement in sleep. Okay, so what happens with melatonin? Again, it is secreted. It is a circadian marker. So that basically means as the daytime decreases, as the amount of light decreases, the amount of melatonin secretion is going to increase. And as there is an awakening happening, the melatonin secretion is going to decrease after that. Okay? So there is a reduced pain inhibition because melatonin is also one of the pain markers. A minor marker, but yes, it is a pain marker also. So that is why in patients with fibromyalgia, you would see a alteration in the melatonin content. Second, we talk about is cortisol. Cortisol is a good marker because it is talking about, especially for physiotherapists, I think it's a good marker because it talks about a number of aspects. It is not only stress, it is related to pain, it is related to metabolism, it is related to stress, it is related to muscle spasm. A lot of things can be exhibited by just finding out an increased level of cortisol. And I would say because of the increased cortisol level, the pain sensitivity in the patient increases. So hence, any condition which is leading to an increased cortisol level is going to lead to a patient being more sensitive towards the pain. Then we talk about sleep fragmentation and central sensitization. These are two mechanisms by which we can work. These are very closely correlated with things like fibromyalgia. Again, why am I talking about fibromyalgia again and again? Is that most of the studies which were conducted in early 2000s were on fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, and chronic low back pain. These are the three areas where good amount of work has been done to find out in the correlation between sleep and these markers. So central sensitization, sleep disturbances lower the pain threshold and amplify the pain responses, which is very commonly seen. If you've seen a fibromyalgia patient around you, you would know that the pain perceptions are increasing. As a result of this increase in the pain perception, there is no correlation in between the amount of stimuli and the responses. That is what we talked about in the beginning of the lecture when we were trying to define pain. That you were talking about, there has to be an appropriate amount of correlation in between the stimuli and the reaction. When there is no appropriate amount of direct correlation between the two, then you are calling it a mechanism or rather a condition where it is mismatched. So central sensitization in one such area where the pain perception is not matching to the initial stimuli that was there, or it can be an absence of a stimuli also which can lead to pain. So everything together is combined here. If you look at the first, this again is there in one of the articles that we have given you. So endogenous pain modulation is one of the most important things. Here you're looking at a difference in between male and female. You're looking at an increased pain facilitation and a decrease in pain inhibition, whereas in males you are looking more as a secondary hyperalgesia and a decrease in pain habituation. Then we talk about inflammation. You are looking at an increased amount of IL-6, okay, and the CRP, as well as the blood pressure is affected, and there are procoagulatory markers which are there. Third is effect on mood and mood related changes. You are looking at increased negative effects and decreased positive effects. This might sound not very important to you, but I think some of you who are in practice now or who have been practicing for a certain time or have seen patients would know that psychology of the patient plays an extremely important role in chronic pains. You cannot manage a patient until unless you have done some counseling for them for chronic pain. It is not possible. That is the basic reason behind the model of the biopsychosocial model of pain when you try to understand that. That is the basic understanding behind that model. Then we have the endogenous substances. You are looking at an increase orexin and cortisol, and there's a decrease in melatonin levels of 25 HD and the dopamine levels. Anatomical brain areas, I don't want to talk about much because sir has already spoken about them in detail, and the cyclical pattern is getting affected. So at the time at which you should be sleeping, you are not able to sleep. That is because the circadian rhythm gets affected. A lot of the patients who did not sleep very well in the night have an increased propensity of sleeping during the day. What is the meaning of the word propensity? It is basically means the probability of going to sleep. It is known as propensity. So there is a scale which is known as ESS, that is Epworth Sleepiness Scale, which talks about, or rather assesses the daytime sleepiness in patients. Okay. So it is seen that a number of studies were conducted. I think in my study also, when I was doing my PhD, I tried to find out a correlation between the PSQI and ESS, and I was able to find a positive correlation between them. That basically means if the PSQI is poorer, the ESS is bound to be there, which is again pointing out that if the patient's sleep is poorer, there's more probability of you feeling sleepy during the day. Then muscle recovery, there is one important muscle which is there, which is the growth hormone. Someone from sports was there, you were from sports, right? So this is, again, a lot of people, athletes would want to take growth hormone as a subsequent, orally they are taking it. Why? One of the important reason why they're taking it orally is because their sleep cycles again are very, very compromised. That is one group of individuals who should be having a very good cycle, but because, again, it is expendable according to the coaches as well as the athletes who are there. Now, this is the most expendable thing. They don't want to stress on or decreasing their straining. They don't want to decrease on the strength training things that they're talking about or the technique training that they're talking about. So they do a compromise here, as a result of which the growth hormone secretion decreases, which is directly related to your tissue healing. So they would prefer to take it orally instead of sleeping very well. Sleep loss leads to higher levels of muscle soreness and prolonged recovery time after exercise, as it leads to a decrease in the blood flow. Similarly, chronic sleep deprivation has been shown that it leads to a decrease in the collagen production as well as protein synthesis in human samples as well as animal samples. Then risk of musculoskeletal disorder, as we have been talking about till now. If pain is more, spasm is more, recovery is more, of course the musculoskeletal disorders incidence is going to be much more. Be it osteoarthritis, be it chronic low back pain, be it rheumatoid arthritis. So most of these conditions are also associated with patients having poorer sleep. And shift workers, again, the people who work in who are working in the night and or are working at various times during the different months. There are two kinds of people. See, okay, one is who is used to working in the night only and sleep during the day. They are able to manage better as compared to for a group of patients like nurses, for example, who are working for in the night for 1 month and the day of the next day and the evening shift in the next month. So for them, it becomes all the more difficult. For them, it is very difficult to come back or follow the circadian rhythm, and the probability of them having sleep dysfunction is much higher. Then sleep deprivation also increases muscle tension, as I said, and stiffness, thus contributing to movement dysfunctions. Then comes motor learning and rehabilitation outcomes. You are familiar that motor skill consolidation basically takes place during sleep. A lot of it is, number of studies have been conducted on stroke patients, and it was found that the patients who have had stroke are also associated with decreased amount of sleep. And if they are able to do exercise very well, if you are able to, the patients who sleep very well respond much better to exercise, especially stroke management. That one of the reasons is also because REM sleep is associated with enhancing the neuroplasticity. which is I think one of the, I am not too good at neuro, I'm pretty bad at neuro, but that is one of the basic things that you talk about when you talk about motor relearning theories and all that. I think that is one of the important areas there. Now, sleep deprivation also impairs your reaction time, coordination, and muscle control. That becomes especially important if you're dealing with geriatric patients, or if you're dealing with patients who are already having an impaired balance. For example, patients with ataxia, patients with Parkinson's. In conditions like this, a lack of sleep further worsens the condition. So hence the probability of a fall is going to be much more in there. Then balance and injury risks, I think I've already spoken about. Then sleep modifies inflammation and chronic disease progression. Here I would like to talk about the first thing that studies have shown, that the pro-inflammatory markers are higher in patients or in animal studies, which was done usually on mice, where it has been shown that the amount of the pro-inflammatory cytokines is much more in patients who are having a deprived sleep. Similarly, there is a disruption of the immune function. There is a delayed recovery from surgery and injuries in patients who have had poor sleep. If you look at the last line there, that is pretty important, where we're talking about addressing sleep issues can actually enhance the physiotherapy outcomes in conditions like arthritis, fibromyalgia, as well as post-operative recovery. Patient adherence. If you didn't sleep very well, what is the first thing that you don't want to do the next day? Exercise. You don't want to exercise the next day because you're too sleepy. So what would you prefer to do? Eat something and go to work. That becomes the priority. So automatically the adherence is going to become poorer. Okay? So physiotherapists who integrate sleep education into treatment plans can actually improve patient participation as well as compliance. And I am not saying it like that. There are research studies which have been conducted which have shown that patients who sleep better, or where sleep education was a part of the compliance of the home program that was given to the patient, they showed better compliance as compared to patients who were not given any kind of sleep education at all. Now, just a brief idea as to what we are going to do eventually during these 5 days. We're talking about extensively about measurement of sleep. So measurement of sleep can basically be done by 3 methods. Questionnaires, which I think a few of you who are already working on sleep would be familiar, that we're talking about questionnaire and self-report measures. Then we have behavioral methods and we have physiological methods. So questionnaires are the basic, most easiest thing on the countertop available. Most of them, I would say, I think 90% of them are the ones which are freely available. We have given you a set of questionnaires in your handbooks, which we will be talking about in detail eventually in my next class. And how does a scale develop? It is developed by the basic methods which are there, that a domain is identified, the psychometric properties like validity and reliability are established, and the CI and a number of other things are done, and the questionnaire is established. What is important in sleep questionnaires is that there is a defined recall period. So recall period basically means from when to when do you want me to report my pain. For example, you ask me a question that did you sleep well yesterday? So what is the recall period here? Yesterday night. Okay, but yesterday night I had guests at home, so as a result of which I could not sleep on time. This is not my usual pattern. If you would have asked me in the last month, do you usually say that you are able to sleep well? Then my recall period is my last month. For example, if you're dealing with a student who came to you with a bad neck pain and you want to ask them there, you have to ask them whether examinations are going on or not. Did you sleep well yesterday? Because the responses are not necessarily going to be the same. That is why the recall period becomes very important for questions. Then the population. There are various populations, and for each population, there's a different set of questionnaires. Again, there's an article here written by Ashraf. I think Ashraf is the author, and from our center only, where we have consolidated all the available questionnaires which are there based on the population. That which population is going to be, which questionnaire should be used for which particular population. Then sleep logs and diaries are another good method, where you are telling the patient to record the sleep just the way the dietitian gives them what to record them, what they have eaten during the day. Similarly, we tell our patients to record whatever they have slept during the day, how many hours, what time, and all those things are recorded. And sometimes questions are pre-formed, where there are a set of questions written which they need to answer for every day, or it is a plain diary and you just tell them to note it down. Usually, the recording of sleep logs or diaries is done for a week. But it depends upon you. You want to increase the time period, you can do that also. So these are just a set of questionnaires which are available, which can be seen, and which we'll be talking about eventually. Then behavioral sleep indicators. These are basically, you can talk about visual. Visual would be done in 2 kinds of populations. One, pediatric, who cannot answer your questions, so whether the child is crying, or the child is awake, eyes are open, or the inside the eye, even if the eyelids are closed, the eyeball is moving inside. Those kind of observations are seen. And second set of patients would be ICU patients who are not able to respond or answer to your questions. These are usually done by nurses who are just recording it, whether the patient closed his eyes at a particular time or not, and what time did they wake up. Then body movements are assessed, very commonly done these days. I think all of you who are wearing smartwatches would be having a small feature as to whether it is going to record your sleep. Along with that, we also have a device known as Actigraph. Actigraph is basically a device which can be worn on a hand. It does look similar like a wristwatch, but it talks about, it is more accurate, or rather the psychometric properties are much more correlated to a polysomnograph as compared to a plain smartwatch that you are wearing. So Actigraph is a device which will record the things like total sleep time and latency, and everything would be recorded. You will be talking about it, right? Dr. Christina is going to be talking about it. Then physiological sleep indicators is the polysomnograph. This is basically an amalgamation of a number of electrodes depending on how many channel machine you have, 16 to 32 to 42, whatever you're talking about. You have electroencephalogram is recorded, EEG is recorded. Then you have electrooculogram. Oculogram is needed to classify it as REM or non-REM. And you have an EMG, which is again to classify between the REM and the non-REM sleep. Somebody was asking a question about where to keep the electrode when you're talking about the calculation. Here it is, mentalis is preferred because you are expecting least amount of movement in the mentalis, and the electrode would not move in the night. If suppose I keep it on the bicep, the tricep, the patient is going to move around and the electrode is going to go away. The lower extremity is used in the patients where there is an assumption of a restless leg syndrome. In those patients, the lower extremity is also recorded for the EEG. Take home message, this is what we talk about: imparts pain perception, muscle recovery, inflammation, motor learning, and rehabilitation outcomes. Sleep assessment should be an integral part of our physiotherapy practice. Better pain relief may promote more restorative sleep and vice versa. Educating the patients is extremely important, and collaboration with other people is also pretty important, because you can not function in a new field without creating your inbounds in other areas. As sleep physiotherapists, we do not have a lot of scope available in the country right now. People don't know about us at all. I would say at all, because there is no one who's working on it. So if, most of the work, especially OSA, is being done by respiratory therapists or by the surgeons, by the respiratory physicians themselves. Those patients are not coming to physiotherapists directly. Patients with RLS or patients with insomnia, they are going to a psychologist, yes, because CBT has become an integral part of the management as far as non-pharmacological intervention is concerned. But physiotherapy is not a part of it. So advocacy becomes extremely important. So these are a few of the references. And thank you. If you have any questions, I will investigate any questions. Any questions, any queries, anything that you want to ask? This is my email ID also I've mentioned here. You can even mail me whenever, if you have, during your research course, even after the 5-day course gets over, if you have any queries and you want certain questions about sleep to be answered, I'm always available on email. I might not respond immediately. Give me a day or two, I will respond. If it is regarding to sleep, I will respond. Okay? Thank you.
A heartfelt thank you to Professor Zubia Waqar ma'am. Ma'am, you have highlighted importance of sleep, various psychological and sociological aspects, and relationship between sleep and chronic pain. Also highlighting the crucial role between sleep and physiotherapy. Your perspective has opened new door to us, and we are very thankful for this insightful lecture. Thank you, ma'am.
We now request everyone to kindly join us for lunch at the Nehru Guest House. We'll start with the next session by 2:30 p.m. sharp. So please take your coupons that has been provided to you in the ID card. Thank you.